lab exam is going to be about the first hour of class, and then you have another lab posted. It's just for the knee, so it's pretty short. But plan on working on that.
I had a question. For the arteries, there's a lot of there's like posterior interosseous and anterior interosseous and all a bunch of proteins. Do you see interosseous or anterior, posterior?
Some of them are both posterior and anterior. And there's the one that's like deep palmar arterial arch. If you'd like me to get specific.
Well, I would like you to get specific, but probably I will give you credit for palmar arch. Learn important stuff, and that's less important than the main. Other questions? Alright, so what we were talking about last time, we got through the heart and we're talking about vessels and vessel resistance. And remember, one of the main goals of the circulatory system is to deliver things to the tissues, right? So how we deliver things to the tissues is through capillary beds. So now we're going to talk about the dynamics of what are going on in those capillary beds. So there's two major forces that control what comes out of the capillary beds and into the tissues. One we talked about last time, hydrostatic pressure, so capillary hydrostatic pressure. The force of the heart, and then the pressure from going from a big vessel down to a teeny tiny vessel. There's going to be a lot of pressure in those capillaries. And remember that liquid is going slow at that point because it's slowed down, depressed through those tiny vessels. So liquid is going slow at very high pressure, so it gets physically forced out of the capillaries. Why does it not get physically forced, say, out of the aorta?
Capillary beds have really thin walls.
Mm-hmm.
The aorta has a lot of different aspects to its wall.
Right. So it has to do with the structure of the capillaries. They're thinner, and they allow more to pass through them. So because they still don't let everything through, we call that filtration. So some stuff stays in and some stuff goes out. Because that pressure is so strong, you push more water out than you should. So you push out a lot of liquid, you push out a lot of solutes because it's at very high pressure. And then it kind of, for lack of a better word, just dries out the blood vessel or the blood cells and things like that. You get too high a concentration of solutes and cells and proteins and things in the vessels. They don't actually get dry, but too high a concentration of those things that tends to draw water back into the capillaries. So then these two forces working in the capillary beds, we take the hydrostatic pressure minus the capillary or the osmotic pressure. Hydrostatic pressure pushes water out, capillary blood colloid osmotic pressure draws it in, and then you get your net filtration pressure. And that is high at the beginning of the capillary and gradually gets lower. Anyone know why that is? Mm-hmm. Yep, so this number starts to drop, not only because you're getting further away from the heart, but also because you've pushed out all the liquid. So it's not at high pressure anymore. Okay, this is an important figure to understand. So to kind of orient you here, here's the oxygenated blood coming in through the smallest arterioles. They then form into capillaries. And along those capillaries, you drop oxygen and pick up CO2, and then these phase into the veins. So sometimes when we're just looking at arteries and veins, say on the cadaver, it's easy easy to think of them as completely separated, but they're all connected through these capillary beds. All right, so oxygen is moving off of these, CO2 is moving on, and that's what the color change is showing. So at the beginning, we're coming from the arteries, so we're at high pressure. So filtration predominates, meaning liquid is moving out. And the reason for that is the pressure is high. So the capillary hydrostatic pressure is higher than the blood colloid osmotic pressure. So then this net filtration pressure is positive, which means liquid is moving out of the capillary beds into the tissues. Questions about that so far? Alright, so then you start to lose liquid. Yep.
So how come it's at 25 consistently? Yeah.
The blood colloid osmotic pressure. Just because the fluid is equaling out constantly, so it's moving in to try and equalize out. So the osmosis doesn't just start; it's always osmosing kind of equally throughout. Okay. So then, as we lose fluids and solutes, we drop in pressure. So if the capillary hydrostatic pressure and the blood colloid osmotic pressure are equal, there's no net fluid movement. That doesn't mean there's no movement. It means there's just the same amount out and in. Okay? And then once we get to the end here, we start to reabsorb water and solutes. So the pressure gets low enough that the blood colloid osmotic pressure is now more than the capillary hydrostatic pressure, and fluid moves back into the capillaries.
The 25.
Yeah, so through this whole thing, osmosis is happening.
But it's just a different concentration.
Right, so here you have just less fluid, period. All right, so questions about this? All right, so to try and test your understanding, I want you to talk with the people around you and think about how this would change if you had a severe hemorrhage. And then if you had very high blood pressure.
The capillary hydrostatic pressure probably decreased.
Yeah, because you have less blood going
So therefore there'd be an increase in the amount of blood colloid being pushed in.
Because then the CH would be less than the BCOP at the middle. And then the BCO would be like a lot greater.
Yeah, it'd probably predominate. It could depend. I mean, depends on the hemorrhage. It could become neutral at the beginning. Depends on how much blood is lost. But then, yeah, it'll definitely at the where there's no net movement, there would be net movement, and then it would be predominating the BCOP would be predominating at the towards the vein, and then sort of yeah, because they're equal at the net move flow now under regular homeostatic conditions. But if there's a hemorrhage, you would lose the force going out would allow more to come in. And I think the opposite would be the same for high blood pressure.
High blood pressure, yeah. It would be a lot more at first.
Yeah. Yeah. And then once again, yeah, depends on how much of a net force that blood pressure has, whether or not it would. But yeah, it would definitely be greater throughout. What kind of stuff is in blood colloid? Blood colloid is just
It's just like water and blood. Draws water back in.
okay.
But I guess like water rich.
Yeah, so you have less water and nutrients in the high blood pressure.
Your osmotic gradient.
Alright, what do you guys think for hemorrhage? What's gonna change? Yeah, the blood vessels will constrict where the hemorrhage is. So how about more globally in the capillary beds? Let's talk CHP and BCOP. How are they gonna change versus normal?
CHP will decrease at first.
CHP is gonna decrease, why?
Hemorrhaging.
Because you have less blood.
You just have flat out less blood. So one way to raise your blood pressure is to drink more liquid, right? Just get more blood. So we lost blood, so the blood that's there is at lower pressure. Okay? How about BCOP? Say about the same, because did you just lose water? No. Did you just lose solutes? No, you lost whole blood. So the concentration of your blood is going to stay relatively the same. Okay? So then, say, let's just give our CHP a kind of arbitrary number. Let's say it's at 30 instead of 35. Like it is there. So that means earlier in the capillary bed, we're going to have no net movement and then reabsorption. So it's going to start earlier. So what do you think that's going to do?
Increase the BCOP.
Yep.
Maybe not all of the oxygen will be switched out.
Yeah, well, it will give the oxygen less amount of time to switch out. What do you think it's going to do to blood volume? Increase blood volume because we're starting to reabsorb earlier because the pressure is lower. So reabsorption starts earlier, and we call that recall of fluids. And it's really important for surviving your hemorrhage because fluids from outside the circulatory system will be drawn into the circulatory system to keep your blood volume up. So it's probably better if you have dry skin than your brain is starved of oxygen, right? So it's gonna draw in fluids from the tissues and bring your blood volume back up. So then if the hemorrhage stops, you're not gonna have long-term decreased blood volume. But you obviously only have so much fluid that can be pulled back into that circulatory system. So if that hemorrhage keeps going, you'll eventually drop too low. So if you think about just the physical force, there's less blood going to be pushed out of the capillary bed, and you're going to start drawing in fluid earlier, just because the blood pressure is lower. And it's actually a kind of an elegant way to keep your homeostasis in your circulatory system. There's no hormones involved here, there's no nervous system. It's just pretty much physics that's controlling this. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? All right, let's try high blood pressure. What's that going to change?
HP would be higher.
Was it going to do the CHP? Increase CHP? How about VCOP? It's probably going to stay about the same, depending on what's causing the increase in your blood pressure. Okay. So then if we increase CHP and keep VCOP the same, so let's say CHP is 50. What's going to happen?
Reabsorption occurs later. Reabsorption will occur later.
Yep, reabsorption would occur later. So reabsorption is going to happen all the way down here. And then how about overall fluid? What do you think is going to happen there? The net filtration pressure is going to be positive for longer, which means liquid is going to move out for longer and then get reabsorbed later. So overall, fluid-wise, what do you think that's going to do? Decrease in the circulatory system? Yeah. So fluid is going to move out. Fluid moves into interstitial space, so the area around the tissues. And to a certain extent, that's good, right? Because what's that going to do to blood pressure? Lower it, because you're taking blood out of the circulatory system. But what's one of the signs that you have high blood pressure, we're talking fluid-wise? Swelling. That's exactly right. So because this goes into the interstitial space, not really within the cells can only absorb so much liquid. It falls with gravity, you get swollen ankles, swollen feet. So what's that called? Edema. Can you think of an instance where we might change VCOP? These are both CHP. Dehydration, yep. So dehydration or overhydration would be examples of changing VCOP. So if we did dehydration, so what's dehydration going to do to VCOP? Increase it. Yep. Because the higher concentration of solutes in here are going to draw more liquid in. Okay, so we've got a high concentration of solutes because we're dehydrated. If CHP stays the same, so that's 35. And then this guy is 30. And what's going to happen along the length of the capillary bed? Yep, reabsorption starts sooner. And we get recall of fluids, just like we get for hemorrhage. So then if you're dehydrated for a while, what happens? Your skin gets dry, your lips get dry. That's because your body is prioritizing the fluid in your circulatory system over that fluid in your extremities and your skin. And that's where it's coming from. So it's pulling that fluid out of the tissues and into the circulatory system. Okay, so then the flip side of that would be, say you were overhydrated. That doesn't happen as much just because of our kidneys are pretty good at preventing overhydration, but you might have it just kind of for a short amount of time before your kidneys are able to get that liquid out. Or if you drink like a really extreme amount of water. Okay, questions? Sure? Yeah, nothing. I'm going to talk about regulation of the cardiovascular system involving both the heart and the blood vessels. So on the short term, we have auto-regulation. This is kind of like locally we'll take care of it. We don't need the higher ups involved. We'll just get it taken care of right here. So some ways that our homeostasis can be disturbed: physical stress like trauma or high temperature, chemical changes like we're running low on oxygen or have too much CO2 or the pH is too acidic, or there's stress chemicals going on, or just increased metabolism. We need to get more nutrients and oxygen to the tissues. So whatever it is, the blood flow and pressure we have is no longer adequate for the tissue needs. So then we can release local vasodilators to increase blood flow to that particular area. So maybe it was the stomach that didn't have enough energy. So let's bring more blood there. Everybody else is pretty much fine. And then that'll bring it back to homeostasis, get normal blood pressure and volume. If that local regulation, that auto-regulation is not enough, then we get into the central regulation, which is the nervous system and the endocrine system. So endocrine response, what is this? Adrenal gland. Yep. So that's going to be our epinephrine and norepinephrine. Stimulate that endocrine response, get an increase in blood volume and pressure. And then the neural mechanisms. Remember, we have those cardiovascular centers. So the cardioacceleratory, cardioinhibitory, and what was the last one? Had to do with the vessels. Vasomotor. Yep. So then the nervous system can control the heart rate, force of contraction, things like that, and then some blood vessel dilation and things like that. So that's going to bring it back to homeostasis. So really, most of the regulation just goes on at the individual tissue, and only if that can't be fixed at the individual tissue do we get these higher level mechanisms involved. So how do we we tell? How do we tell we're not in homeostasis in our circulatory system? So we have a few receptors. One is the baroreceptors, and what are they going to sense? Pressure. Yep. So where these live are in the carotid sinus here, in the carotid artery, and then it's just kind of a wide spot called the carotid sinus. They're also found in the aortic sinus, so there's a pocket in the ascending aorta and in the right atrium. So they're localized areas where they're testing for blood pressure. So then when blood pressure gets too high, it stimulates those baroreceptors, and it stimulates the cardioinhibitory center. That's going to decrease heart rate, inhibit the vasomotor center and the cardioauxiliary center, decrease cardiac output, and cause vasodilation. So why does vasodilation drop blood pressure?
The larger area.
Yep, so if you have widespread vasodilation, same amount of blood is occupying now a bigger space, so it's at lower pressure. Okay. So then between those two things, we can get back to the normal blood pressure range. Okay. So then if you're decreasing blood pressure, that inhibits the baroreceptors, stimulates that vasomotor center and the cardioauxiliary center, constricts the blood vessels, so same amount of blood in a smaller spot, higher pressure, increases cardiac output, and then can bring your blood pressure back up. But remember, if any of these nervous system responses aren't adequate, you can also bring in hormone responses. So this talks about epinephrine being involved in bringing you back up to a higher blood pressure if this isn't effective. So remember when we talked about those baroreceptor reflexes and the one that caused you to faint when you had high pressure on your neck? Anyone want to explain how that works?
Well, it's, you have high blood pressure. If you have high pressure there, then it's stimulating the baroreceptors to the point where the baroreceptors are like, oh, this pressure is constant. I really need to release those vasodilators, which causes the vasodilation, which then increases the volume of the vessels to the point where it's just like too much.
Yep, so you didn't actually have high blood pressure everywhere. And so then it dropped it even lower, and that's what can cause you to faint. And then remember, we don't have those baroreceptors everywhere, and that's why they can be tricked by just activating certain ones, like around the neck. While I was writing that test for you, I wanted to see if it was the same thing as the Vulcan death pinch from Star Trek. Apparently that has to do with nerves. So here's the kind of text description of that, and then it talks about how you can have epinephrine and norepinephrine get involved if those nervous system responses are not adequate. So here are the endocrine responses to the decreasing blood pressure and volume. So if the baroreceptors signaling through the nervous system aren't enough to bring that blood pressure back to normal, we gotta change the amount of blood that we have. Okay, so if you don't have enough blood, there's no way you're gonna get it to high enough pressure by just modifying heart rate and vessel constriction. So the endocrine response can help you make more blood. So if you have, just over the short term, a decreased blood pressure and volume, epinephrine and norepinephrine in the sympathetic response can affect the cardiac output, And remember what they're doing to the heart, the actual cardiac muscle cells, what's going on with norepinephrine and epinephrine for those. So we're getting those cells closer to threshold. That's what those hormones are doing. And then they're more likely to contract. So that's going to increase our heart rate, which is going to increase our blood pressure. And then also cause peripheral vasoconstriction. So then if that's still not enough, we bring in the kidneys. So two separate pathways. And these pathways basically form the liquid of blood through the renin cascade, and then the cells of blood through the function of erythropoietin. So then erythropoietin, what does it do? Erythropoietin, where does it act to make those blood cells? Bone marrow. So if erythropoietin is present in the bone marrow, those, what are those stem cells called? HSCs, hematopoietic stem cells, then become red blood cells rather than becoming the white blood cells. So that causes them to differentiate into red blood cells. So we know that pathway, we talked about that pathway before. The renin cascade is the actions of angiotensin II are going to cause more vasoconstriction, but then also cause antidiuretic hormone to be released. What does that do? Yep, so a diuretic is going to make you pee, right? So that's going to prevent that. So you're retaining water. So it's going to bring up your blood volume. You're not going to pee as much. And then it also plays in this pathway that stimulates thirst. So you're going to feel thirsty, so you'll drink more. And that will bring up the blood volume both through the liquid components and the cell components. So more details about how these hormones are interacting with each other. So the kidney makes renin, which converts angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. That stimulates thirst and release of ADH, and activates the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone. So all of these hormones, renin, angiotensin 2, ADH, and aldosterone, are going to work together to retain fluid and sodium, stimulate thirst, and bring up that blood volume. Angiotensin 2. So anyone know what ACE inhibitors are used to treat? So high blood pressure. So if you're taking an ACE inhibitor, that's going to drop your blood volume because you're not going to retain fluid. You're going to have less stimulation of thirst. It's going to drop your blood volume. So it inhibits Yep, so ACE is an enzyme that converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. So an ACE inhibitor would stop that enzyme. And this pathway is going to come back again when we talk about the urinary system, because obviously this is one of the major things that regulates what happens in the kidney. All right, so that was the endocrine response to low blood pressure. Here's the endocrine response to high blood pressure. So you've got too high blood pressure. The heart releases these chemicals called natriuretic peptides. Two different ones, atrial natriuretic peptide and brain natriuretic peptide. And what they do is they increase sodium loss in the urine, water loss in the urine, reduce thirst, inhibit ADH, aldosterone, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cause peripheral vasodilation. So pretty much the exact opposite thing that renin does. So you're going to lose more fluid, you're going to lose more solutes through excretion, and then that's going to decrease blood volume and therefore blood pressure. Alright, so all of those things are triggered by baroreceptors. So issues with blood pressure are going to be what stimulate those baroreceptors or inhibit those baroreceptors. And those baroreceptors trigger a nervous system response, and if that's not adequate, it goes to an endocrine response. So those were the two feedback loops we just saw. That's not the only thing that's monitoring what's going on in your blood. So it's not only your blood pressure that's important, what is in the blood is also very important. So we have chemoreceptors that are going to monitor our CO2, our oxygen, and our pH levels both in the blood and cerebral spinal fluid. These are found in similar places, the carotid bodies, the aortic bodies, but then also the medulla oblongata to monitor that cerebral spinal fluid. All right, so if we have increasing CO2 levels or decreasing pH and oxygen levels, that's going to trigger those chemoreceptors. So either you're accumulating too much CO2, or your blood is getting too acidic, or oxygen is too low. And oftentimes these things all go hand in hand. They all happen in the same instances. Stimulates those chemoreceptors, and then stimulates the cardioacceleratory center and the vasomotor center. We want to increase cardiac output and blood pressure. So we want to cycle the blood faster. So if we're out of oxygen, get it to the lungs. Get us more oxygen. We've got too much CO2, same thing. Get that blood to the lungs. Get more respiration going. So that's an extra loop that's going to feed into this one. The last one involves the urinary system. This guy is going to involve the respiratory system. So not only do we increase the blood pressure and blood flow and cardiac output, we're also increasing the respiratory rate. Because who cares if you're bringing blood to the lungs if they're not breathing in more oxygen to load it onto that hemoglobin. Okay. So again, it's any one of these instances happens, but oftentimes they all go together.
So the previous one, you can have the urinary system, it's also baroreceptors for that one, like it's just one chemo.
Questions? Alright, so just like you did your homeostasis, these things are all going on at the same time, doing fine-tune adjustments. You're almost never all day in one situation or all day in the other situation. So your cardiac output adjusts a lot to exercise. And it's not just widespread. Your body is able to divert blood to different places depending upon where you need it. So at rest, the average person is 5.8 liters per minute for cardiac output. And we've got about 750 mils go to the brain, 250 to the heart, kidneys, bone, viscera, skin, other tissues. All right, so light exercise. What do you see changes? Where do you see changes compared to at rest?
Kidneys.
So more or less to the kidneys. Less. So they need all that, all the nutrients, they need the energy. Why do the skin though? So metabolism is hot. So that releases heat. We've got blood that goes to the skin to release that heat. So you don't fry your insides when you exercise. Okay. So then what accounts for the increased cardiac output when you're exercising? Heart rate is going to increase. What increases your cardiac output when you exercise? Stroke volume, and what's going to increase your stroke volume? There's lots of right answers. Your muscles needing more oxygen, so you'll have a hormone response. It's going to increase that. Sympathetic response. Blood pressure. The sympathetic response is going to affect blood pressure. All right, so back to stroke volume. Your venous return is going to increase. Why is that?
You're moving and your muscles are pumping that blood back up.
Yep, so your muscles are contracting. That's pushing blood out of that venous system into the heart. So that's going to be one of the fastest ways you're getting a higher cardiac output. Okay. So then another thing that helps increase that cardiac output is what's called the respiratory pump. So each inhalation creates a negative pressure, which pulls blood into the vena cava. So the higher your respiratory rate, it increases your cardiac output as well. Okay. So then during heavy exercise, what do you notice?
It's mostly the muscles and the skin.
Lots of skeletal muscles, lots of the skin, for the same reasons we talked about with light exercise. Cardiac output is really increasing for all those reasons that we talked about. More blood is making it to the heart. We've got the sympathetic response going. We've got endocrine response. We've got nervous system involved. Everything that we possibly do to increase the heart output. Okay. What else do you notice?
The brain is the same on all of them.
Well, so you would never want to drop below a certain amount, right? Because that would kill you. But the brain pretty much has a set level of blood that goes to it all the time.
Would it ever increase?
It might increase a little bit, say if your blood pressure was increasing or something like that, but it's pretty well regulated to keep stable, to keep you from fainting or anything like that when there's big fluctuations in blood to the brain. So that's a good point. That's one of the things I wanted to pull out of this, is that though you divert blood away from the visceral organs to the skeletal muscle and the skin and the heart, the brain always gets priority. So even when we have hemorrhage and things like that, we still try and keep the blood to the brain at that set level. Because it doesn't matter if your skeletal muscles have all the energy in the world if you can't work them. Because your brain's not working. Good questions? Alright, so we're going to get into a few kind of disorders and issues that can happen with the cardiovascular system. So one of the leading causes of death in the United States is going to be heart disease. So arteriosclerosis is going to be any thickening or toughening of the artery walls. And the most dangerous place for this to happen is in the coronary arteries, so the arteries that serve the heart, and the arteries of the brain that can cause strokes. So then if you get a partial or complete blockage of the coronary circulation, it starves the heart of oxygen and then will starve the rest of the body of blood because the heart's not pumping it. All right, so atherosclerosis is when you get lipid in the tunica media, so that middle layer of the blood vessels. And this is a subtype of arteriosclerosis, so lipid specific. And this is the one that's associated with elevated cholesterol. So there's more and more research to show that your genetics play a bigger role in this than your diet. So some people can eat a perfectly healthy diet and have really high cholesterol, and some people are what I call skinny fat, and eat terribly and still have fine cholesterol, look very healthy. Okay. So here's what a coronary artery with a lipid deposit looks like. So one thing that I used to think is that you just kind of have big fat glob and it floated around and got stuck. But really what happens is the fat gets deposited into the walls and pushes them and constricts them. Okay? So then if you look at a real blood vessel, this is the plaque deposit in that blood vessel. Which makes it harder to treat because it's kind of stuck there. So what do? Put in a stent. So you can basically take the vessel, open it up, put in this balloon that pushes the plaque over to the side and allows blood to flow freely through it. And then you can place a stable stent in there that keeps that plaque pushed against the wall and keeps the blood flowing through. And then this is a heart here that has normal blood flow, unconstricted blood flow. So all in red, you can see those coronary arteries. And then this is a person who has a constriction in one of their coronary arteries. You can see there's quite a bit less blood flow. And then where's that blood going to? General on the heart, what kind of tissue? Yep, the cardiac muscle cells of the heart. So then if you drop the blood flow to those, what do you think that's going to do to the heart? Can't pump as efficiently. So you need the energy, you need the oxygen from these blood vessels to allow the heart to pump. So then here's a picture of a stent. It's going to prevent that plaque from redeveloping after you kind of push that plaque over to the edges of the vessel wall. Right, so other heart problems, remember heart murmurs oftentimes are not an issue, especially if you're born with one and you've had it for your whole life. Because your heart is really able to adapt and get stronger. So if you have a heart murmur, it's probably not a big deal, but if one starts to develop, it might be a sign that you have some damage to your valves. So arrhythmias, what do you think is going on in an arrhythmia? Yeah, so it's an innervation issue. Yeah, so the cascade of electrical events isn't happening in order. So maybe your ventricle is contracting before your atrium is done contracting. Or maybe the ventricle is contracting before the atria has contracted. So then pacemakers are going to, and then in this case we're talking about the electrical surgical pacemaker and not the pacemaker cells. They do a similar thing. So what does a pacemaker do when you get it inserted? And I'll show you in lab we have a heart that has a pacemaker in it. Remind me because I always forget about it. But it basically just shocks your heart at those nodes and overrides those irregular electrical signals of your heart. Pacemakers are awesome. I think they're one of the coolest inventions ever. You can actually, so they implant them just subdermally. You can hold a phone up to them and they can read out their data for your doctor pressure. You don't even need to go in and get them checked out.
Fun fact for everyone, I have an SA node issue, and I had a 72-hour study, and I was 2 heartbeats away from qualifying for a pacemaker, which sucks. But I also have what they call an overreactive heart, so any endocrine response I have is like way amplified. So I have blood problems.
So not jump out and scare you.
No, all the time. If I ever keel over, don't call an ambulance. I'm fine. It'll go away. I promise. I promise.
Was there another?
So are pacemakers going all the time, or they just shot?
They're able to detect. They only kick in when necessary. Yep. My grandfather had a pacemaker, and at a certain point, if they're kicking in too often, if your electrical signaling is not working at all or well enough anymore, they pull them because they will kick in and kick in and kick in and can scald you. So they pretty much pulled his pacemaker and said, we don't know how much time you have. It could be tomorrow, it could be months, but it was kind of nice for him because he knew it was coming and he went very peacefully. But the pacemakers do kick in when necessary, but at some point the heart is not able to contract as much as it needs to. And shocking, it's not going to help. All right, so you can also have cardiomyopathy if you have damage to that muscle part of the heart rather than the electrical part of the heart. So then remember we talked about how high blood pressure can cause edema. Anyone want to explain that again? How would you explain it to each other and not me? And then add the question, why do people with high blood pressure get put on a low salt diet?
More fluid contaminating, causing swelling.
So it's going to be a pressure issue. So pressure is going to push the liquid out of the vessels. Yep. All right, so talk about CHP and BCOP, high blood pressure, and salt.
Coming out.
Just let me see it.
Yeah.